welcome to another episode of Earning the Hate. How you going, people? Another little Earning the Hate from the police. Fish and Game is one of those special jobs that they allow government to circumvent the Constitution, just like they do with exigency. And government has been watering down the Constitution because Constitution limits government. And government doesn't like to be limited, so therefore they find ways around the Constitution. And then other people run around and go, they can't do that. We have a Constitution. Well, they do it, and they do it all the time. So here, I guess Terry Rainwater, they're suing on his behalf because Fish and Game, or they call it Tennessee Wildlife, and I keep hearing how great Tennessee is and how free they are. It doesn't sound like you're very free here. This guy lives on his own property. He has no trespassing signs up, and the freaking Fish and Game go out there and install cameras quietly without his permission. They sneak onto his property and install government cameras with no warrant and no probable cause, just to survey him or put him under surveillance on his own property without his knowledge, with no probable cause and no court order. That is strictly against the Fourth Amendment for unlawful search and seizure. It's bullshit. But you know what? It's just a little thing, Rick. They got to protect the endangered mosquito. Check this out. These guys are suing on their behalf. Good for these guys.
Tennessee agents are doing is they're entering his property without a warrant, snooping around and installing cameras in his trees. Now, it's pretty egregious, but under federal law, at least, under the U.S. Supreme Court's interpretation of the Fourth Amendment, police officers, government agents don't have to get a warrant to snoop around and search on your private land. There's a distinction drawn in Supreme Court precedent between the home and what's called the curtilage, which is the area immediately surrounding your home, and the rest of the real property you might own. And the point of this case is to say that the Tennessee courts and the Tennessee Constitution don't follow that doctrine.
Why don't you explain to people sort of the different boundaries of the property that they may own, right? From a couple of feet in from the road has a different legal doctrine than 10 feet from the road versus 3 feet away from their house, right?
Yeah. I think the way to think about this is that the protected area, at least if you go to federal court, would be your home and the immediately surrounding areas. So areas that are considered associated with intimate activities of the home. So something that would be protected under a lot of federal cases, for instance, would be like your front yard, or maybe a shed where you do activities closely associated with home life that's kind of adjacent to your yard. It's covered, that kind of thing. But the rest of your property, big open fields where you might farm or hunt, even if it's fenced, even if there are no trespassing signs, that stuff doesn't get protection, at least under the federal doctrine.
See, this is just another example of more federal government overreach. Every state needs to kick the Fed out and say, keep your ass in Washington and stay the hell out of our state business. The feds have been inching their way into every aspect so they can have federal control. Large government, communist governments always want absolute control. They don't want pesky little states and pesky little counties and cities making their own rules for the citizens that live there. Federal government and communism wants everybody to be miserable. They want to take from those that work hard, and they want to give it to those that don't work. And that is the problem. And this is just another example of the federal law saying, screw your Constitution, screw you pesky citizens, and screw your right to privacy.
And so the agents were walking past no trespassing signs. How far into the property were they planting these cameras? And I think a lot of people are going to feel like this is just completely unconstitutional. What is under the federal Constitution, what was the analysis that allows this?
Well, they were walking, several hundred yards into this 135-acre property. So acres and acres in, they actually installed on Terry's property 2 cameras. So one was installed about a few hundred yards after the gate. Then the officers continued to drive several hundred more yards down a private road that Terry owns until they reached a second tree, and then they installed another camera in that tree. So what they're relying on, I think, is this federal open fields doctrine. So there's a state statute in Tennessee.
Federal open fields doctrine. Gee, government didn't want to get more power on that one.
That says that game wardens can snoop around your property without a warrant to enforce the state's hunting laws, And I think that the basis for that statute, the reason Tennessee thinks it can adopt a statute like that, is this federal open fields doctrine.
Okay, this is why I think trespassing on someone's property should be a shootable offense. If states passed, if you enter someone's property, property owners are required to fire one warning shot, and if you don't leave, they can shoot you. That would stop this shit, because these federal flunkies would stop wandering around on people's property if they thought they could get shot, because they're scared of their own damn shadow. If, you know, a freaking kid eats a Pop-Tart in the way of a gun, they want to shoot the kid. So making state laws that, hey, you can shoot trespassers, and if somebody comes on your property and you give them warning and they don't immediately leave, you can shoot them. I guarantee you the federal agents will stop snooping around people's properties if that shit becomes law.
And the point of this case is that we want to establish in Tennessee that doctrine doesn't apply.
So what was the rationale that said that private property isn't actually completely private when it comes to, you know, an open field? Like, why is the piece of property being an open field no longer afforded the same constitutional rights as the portion of your property that's closer to your home?
There's kind of two bases for the open fields doctrine. The original one, from a case called Hester in 1924, is that the Fourth Amendment protects persons, houses, papers, and effects, and that open fields don't fall into any of those categories. The second rationale is that open fields aren't subject or don't implicate any reasonable expectation of privacy for the property owner.
Really? Tell that to Zuckerberg. Tell that to people that put 8-foot walls around their homes. You know, you don't see federal agents scaling 8-foot walls, do you? No. They just climb fences if you don't have the money to put up an 8-foot wall with spikes on top. They don't climb those fences. They're not running around Zuckerberg's how many acre paces he lives on, because he's got walls around it. But the other pesky citizens, they can't afford to have those walls. Then the federal government goes, oh no, it's okay. They can just go in there and wander around and climb your fence and ignore your private property. This is freaking treasonous bullshit, tyrannical crap.
Is there a way that a person could make a larger portion of their property more private?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the ways that Tennessee courts have recognized that you could do that is by fencing your property and actually using it, which is exactly what's going on here. Terry has put a gate at the front of his property. He's put up no trespassing signs, and he's actively using the property, not just for living, but for farming and hunting.
So tell me how they found these cameras in the first place.
Well, the way they found them was by stumbling across them on their property. Terry's son was driving through their property. He noticed one camera hanging from a string in a tree, pointed across a field that actually looked at the back of their tenant's home. And then he kept driving, and he noticed.
If I found a freaking damn camera on my property that I didn't know about, that thing would be at the bottom of my toilet, and I'd be taking a big shit right on the lens, and let that would be the last footage they get from that camera.
Noticed a second camera, again, in a tree. But this wasn't the first time they had seen state officers on their property searching around without a warrant.
And
if I see a guy on my property and he's got a gun, I'm feeling threatened. I think he came there to do harm. I'm telling you, man, until people start putting federal government in its place, we are never going to gain our freedom back, and we're losing it more and more each day. This is from the Institute of Justice. Good for them. I'm glad they're doing this. If you want to go watch it, it's on their channel. Government caught putting cameras on private property. We'll end that there. A little more earning the hate.